Good day to everybody in TV land. This is Mike Hittner, his Historic Point Basse update. Today, joining me is Tom Bramer. Tom,
Morning.
welcome. Today we're going to talk about a lot of things, actually. We just got back from a historic conference. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but we always like to review our past event, and so February 16th at Nakusa Community Center, we had our winter feast. I think probably, Tom, 25th, 30th, somewhere in there?
Yeah, it's close to 30, not quite maybe.
29 years or something like that. So we had it, considering folks now as we're taping this, a lot of weather's transpired, a lot of snow, a lot of cold and everything. We just really hit a beautiful weekend. We couldn't ask for anything better. About 25 degrees, no snow, just a great time. It was, I'd say one of the more successful
Better
ones
than average, by
overall,
certain,
looking
yeah.
at it. We made a few dollars, which it's basically a fundraiser for us, and also a camaraderie with our citizens and with our members and our public that likes to come to that sort of thing. And Tom, why don't you give them a little idea of how the kitchen went? I know there wasn't a lot of food left, which was really nice.
We lucked out really well. We figure somewhere 160 people ate total, counting some of the extra the 4-H'ers and stuff that came to help with the dinner. We did ham and chicken, dressing, German potato salad, which was a brand new thing for us this year, and it went over well. Mm-hmm. We won't probably do it next year, but it will it will come back.
Yes.
We did green beans. We did raccoon and sauerkraut, which again went over very well. We did beaver cabbage rolls, mm-hmm. and we had a little of the stuffing left, so we made some barbecue meatballs with the stuffing, and they went really well.
You had venison meatloaf. Huh?
Venison meatloaf, yep. And then we had a venison shepherd's pie, mm-hmm. and that went real well. We had some rabbit fricassee on small biscuits. That went real well. So the food itself, and most of it went, and the vast majority of, in fact, all of, that we didn't serve, we put up in to-go containers, and the folks took it with them when they left.
Yes. Which
is exactly what we want them to do.
We don't want to take it back.
What are we going to do with, a quart of whatever?
Yes.
No. We took a little bit home ourselves just because we like it, but most of it went to the people that, as they left, they could stop and pick up a to-go container of whatever it is. I thought it went real well. The evening went well. We had lots of good help. The people seemed to enjoy themselves very much.
Yeah, kind of for me anyway, and I think for most of us people associated with Wakely, was the appearance of Laurel and Scott Hall, who came from Salt Lake City. Now, for you folks that weren't there, and most of you weren't, unfortunately, and we just don't have room for you all, but was Laurel Hall's 90th birthday on the Tuesday before the event, so it would have been like the 11th or 12th, something like that, of February. And her son asked, "What would you like to do, Mom, for your birthday?" And she says, "I want to go to this winter feast. They keep sending me a ticket every year," because she's a lifetime member, and she's never been here before. And the significance of Laurel Hall is she's the great-granddaughter of Martha Jane Wakely and the great-great-granddaughter of Robert and Mary Wakely. So, I mean, it's a Wakely relative, and we've had a few of them come over the years, but I think it's probably been 10 or 12 years since we've had any of them here. Normally they come in the summer for the festival because, of course, it's nicer to travel and everything. So Scott got that dream wish of his mother's, and they came, I think, on a Thursday or a Friday, and Jim Nickel, who's had some communication with him, one of our members, took him out to the house so they could see the house on Saturday while everybody else was kind of making preparations at the hall and everything. And then we'll maybe see a little later on, we've got some footage of her and Scott talking to Dave Engel, who's done the most work on the Wakely story as we know it. and he interviewed them, and so there's some questions and answers and a little video clip of that. I think it's about 20 or 25 minutes long that you get to see, but that was a real thrill to see them and introduce them to the audience there. And consider 90 years old, she wanted to travel in the middle of winter, not knowing what to expect.
And the sharpest lady and the nicest lady, both of them.
Yes.
Scott was too.
Yeah.
But she was just like, it was so cool.
Yeah.
And she was having such a good time.
Yes, and they got to take back a little of the site with them. Laurel bid on and got a bowl that was made by one of our members, Johan. He makes bowl out of some of the different woods that are cut down there and everything. He just spends a lot of time on that. And then Scott got a rolling pin made by Jim Nickel, one of our members, that he wanted to take back, and he bid on and was successful. So they kind of took part of us back with them, and they left part of themselves with us. So it was kind of a happy coincidence. Prairie Strings on the Prairie was a great band again. They do such a wonderful job. And what I like about it, in the past sometimes when we've had dancing, it's hard to get interaction with the audience. Those people have no trouble getting. There's usually 24 couples out there dancing.
I don't know how they do it because we never could. But
No. So they do a great job. They, excuse me, they play the music and they have somebody that calls it. They have people participation. They're mostly young people with a few moms or something in there. And we're so happy to have them with us. And we'd like to thank the city of Nakusa again for the use of their great hall. Dan Schmidt, who is kind of the overseer of it there to make sure that everything goes well. And we certainly ask a lot out of Dan, and we appreciate what he's done in helping us. But a great overall event, a lot of participation. Wittenberg 4-H, the kids and parents helped us a lot. I'd like to thank all the citizens of Point Basse that came out and participated in preparing the meals and things of that sort. So it was a great event and a lot of participation from probably 25 or 30 individuals that volunteered their time to make it a successful event.
the Girl Scouts also from Rapids were out and helped with the.
And they helped with the serving of the dinner, and also they displayed some of the bird cards, metal things that are going to be put on our trail this spring. And that was part of their project to pick out, I think it was 24 or 25 birds that were native to the area and that sort of thing. And so they put those out, and Diane Nickel, one of our members, introduced them, and with their troop leader, and then three of the scouts themselves. And it's a nice project, and we like to, over the years we worked with Boy Scouts for Eagle projects, and we worked with other groups. So we're very fortunate to have this interaction with a lot of different groups and a lot of volunteers that come out to the site and make our site better because of it. So let's go on to our next event, Tom. That's on Saturday, March 23rd from 10 to 4 at the site. And that's our Wakely's Sugar Bush. Now, it's something that the Wakeleys would have done, folks. It's one of those things. Sugar was expensive to get it from one of the Caribbean islands or from down south to get it to us. And so sugar in whatever form, and maple sugar was probably their easiest form to get. And we'd have to go back many, many years. Tom, why don't you tell what you think the story is about the Native Americans, how they discovered it?
Well, the legend told is that a guy comes home from hunting and sticks his tomahawk into the tree. It would have been a stone tomahawk, so he probably didn't do that. That's part of the legend. Legends are hard to interpret. But anyway, there was a gash on the tree, and it dripped this liquid. And the next day, his wife, wanting to have something to cook her meat in, found that this was dripping and caught some of this sap, and cooked her meat in it. It tasted so good that they then started doing, collecting it, and then realized that if you cook it down and concentrate it, you could keep it, because it will mold.
Right.
Either sap or syrup left alone. But maple sugar, which was their final product, you can store indefinitely.
And we know last year I had got some statistics from Michigan that that this maple sugar was a big business. Now, in especially the East Coast, you can imagine people in New York, Philadelphia, Boston, those different areas. What they wanted to do, they were protesting the slave trade, and the slave trade was necessary for like cotton and tobacco and for sugar. And so a way to protest it was to buy a substitute sugar. So they were buying from the Native Americans in the state of Michigan tons of this maple sugar.
Literally tons.
Tons of it. And they were shipping it back east, and they were using it for their sweetener there. And a kind of a protest rather than maybe using sugar, which maybe was the same price, or this stuff was selling like for 4 or 5 cents a pound. It wasn't like it was expensive, though we can, as we do our sap collection and cooking down, it's labor intensive, folks. You're going to be spending hours and hours and hours doing this. When you look at 4 or 5 cents a pound, well, you're also looking back in the mid 1800s. It's a whole different story, of course, for value for time and that sort of thing. But so it was a big industry, bigger than we realized. Kind of almost like when we talk about when we were cutting ice at Nepco Lake for our ice house, how big the ice industry was. So it's one of those things put in perspective. Really gives you a different sense of everything. So we're going to be doing some of that ourselves there. We got a big iron cauldron, and we put the sap in there, and we'll be tapping our trees starting probably on the 18th of March. It's going to be a little slower year because of all the snow and the cold and everything, but I think we'll get some sap run. And we'll start boiling it in a big cauldron suspended over an open fire right behind the 3-bay shed. So if you want to take a look at that. In the same spot, we'll also be doing the Native American method. Of course, they didn't have iron. They didn't have that wherewithal to cook it in that way. Tom, why don't you explain how the Native Americans did it with the log and everything?
They hollow out a log, basswood or other log. The softer the wood, the easier it is to do. And then you put sap in it and then use hot rocks, baseball size rocks, to you take them from the fire. We dip them in a little bit of water just to get some of the ash off, and then into the sap. And you can boil sap that way.
Yeah, you just mentioned before we went
I just
on
saw
air.
YouTube.
Yeah.
We've done it a number of times and got it up very warm, but we've never quite accomplished, as one of the guys that was filming said, they must have better rocks than we got. But we get it up really hot. But I saw YouTube the other day, and it was at just a ferocious boil. So it can be done. They also concentrated it now they could probably cook all night long. I mean, it's a big family thing, extended family at a sugar bush. So there'd be enough people some would work days and some would work a little later, and so they could keep doing it all day and night. But in the beginning, they would leave the sap sit a while, and it would get scum ice on it.
Throw that off.
The sugar naturally settles if you leave it sit for a few hours. The natural minerals and sugars that are in that sap, and there's only a couple of 3%, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
I think 4% is high.
Yeah. That starts to settle, and that ice that you get on top, that's free. I mean, you get rid of it as water.
Either you're going to have to boil it off or you take it off as ice.
Yeah, take it off, and you could do that as you're waiting to boil the sap. It's already concentrating some. And then they finished it in either wooden or clay vessels. And one thing I read yesterday was that when they get ready to do it, they get the syrup down as thick as they can by boiling it this way. Then they get it into a wooden or ceramic bowl. They put in a small piece of venison fat. Now, I'd never heard that before. It came from the Ojibwa folks in the central part of Michigan, where we visited a few years ago.
Yes.
So I'm taking it to be pretty true, because they really, really work at being authentic.
Yes.
But put that in there, and I think maybe it's kind of like when you put two kinds of sugar together to make taffy or whatever. Here it changes the molecular just enough, and I think maybe that's what that fat thing is. I don't know for sure. That's just my take, but I can't see of another reason. But they put that in and then stir it vigorously, and as that melts, it got into the thing and helped it granulate into the.
And the Native Americans, as we know, could only sell it or use it in a granular form.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't preserve it. They had no method to. And
Canning,
you
well,
could,
nobody did in those days.
you could keep it cold for a while, but by end of April, first part of May, or especially by June, it's going to be warm.
Yeah.
And so you're going to end up with molding and spoilage. So this was a way for them to keep it, and plus, probably easier way to transport. Liquid isn't easy to transport.
And it's all over, and it bugs and things that. I had a regular maple syrup producer, a good amateur, told me yesterday or the other day. Nick told us that they lost quite a bit of sap last year because they couldn't do it fast enough, and it molded. So even not just the syrup would do that, but if you don't have cold enough weather, even the sap will get funky after a while.
So we'll interpret both methods, like the early pioneers, like the Wakeleys, would have done it in a steel cauldron that holds probably 15 or 20 gallons, and then a hollowed out log like the Native Americans would have done it, and probably holds maybe 2 or 3 gallons in there.
Yeah.
And we'll do it both methods. Behind the 3-bay shed, if you want to see that, that'll be an ongoing demonstration, because basically from start to finish, we have about 6 or 7 hours. We know that it won't get down to the syrup level. It gets about half or 2/3 of the way there, but that's at best, so, sort of thing. I have here with me today some taps, and some of these are old taps that were hollowed out. These are made by pioneers now. This wasn't Native Americans, of course. These were early taps. You can see they got the hole that goes in the tree. Fairly large size hole. I mean, comparatively to what we see in the steel ones. These are made out of wood. More than likely pine or something soft. It's fairly light. Fairly light. And then this is made out of sumac, and this is the type of taps that we use. I think maybe you made these, Tom, huh?
I did.
You did. Made out of sumac, hollowed out on the end, and got a little runway here for the sap, and they're put in a little bit of an angle, set back in maybe half inch?
Oh yeah.
Half inch, 3/4 inch into the tree, and then the sap runs out here, and then we have a bucket that would sit on the end of here, and there's a little indentation where it holds the bucket so the bucket doesn't slide off. That's what we made. And this is a little more modern method that was made by hand. This is all made by hand. It's got the little thing there where the sap flows. It's got a little plug. You can see that we're progressing here in time. This one is probably maybe 1920s, 30s, or 40s or something like this. This could be something from turn of the century or earlier. And you can see the diameter is a lot different. Now they're not making such a big hole in the tree. They're making a smaller hole, and they have availability of metal, so they're just twisting a little piece of wire around here, fairly substantial, to hold the pail onto that. So you can see that. And then we get into the metal ones, which are interesting. Some of the old ones, of course, with the opening and the flow, and then it's got a couple different things there where you could hang the pail on. And this part looks a little bit like the end of a torpedo or something. That goes into the tree. It's a little different because it's got a couple holes all the way around it, feeding this hole here. And this is a cast one, iron one, with the flow here. It's got a built-in hook here where you hang your pail, and this part goes into the tree. That's mounted in the tree. It looks like 1/3 of an inch, something like that. And then we get a little more modern. This is the new cast ones that have been around probably for the last 40 years or so. And these almost all this maple syrup equipment is probably made in Canada, actually, because they're one of the biggest producers in the world. Tom and I were up there when a number of years ago, and the mafia disappeared a whole bunch of supply because the Canadian government controls the maple syrup in Canada and warehouses it and then releases it onto the market at certain times to kind of control prices or whatever. And they went to one of their warehouses and there wasn't as much as was on the ledger.
Some of those big vats were empty.
Yeah, so somebody absconded with it because it was big money, millions of dollars worth. So this is a little metal and with a little thing here, and it's got a little thing on the top here where you hold your pail rather than having a hook. Then we get up to the nylon ones. This is a newer one, probably from, I'd say, late 80s, early 90s, that sort of thing. All similar in style. The thing comes out here. You can see how similar it is to maybe this one that was from the 30s or 40s or something. It's got the hook built into it, except it's nylon. Much less expensive. Probably it'd last as long or maybe even longer. This is kind of adjustable and that. And of course, we go up to the modern day. They have the plastic that goes in the tree, and they hook it up. They hook it up to a hose, and that goes into a bigger pail, or would go into a collector container, or maybe a 55-gallon drum, and they'd pick that up, and they maybe have 5 or 6 trees emptying into that drum. So, or they have the lines running all the way to the sap house.
In fact, there is now some where they I wouldn't call it a vacuum, but it's a negative pressure, a degree or two, just enough so that that encourages that flow, and they pump it right down into the. Depends on where you are.
Yeah.
If you're on a hill, you're in good shape.
Yeah, and then it would pump it into a big vat, and it would be a holding tank or whatever that they would release it in to cook down as they needed it or as they could use it, sort of thing. So all these things we'll also have at the site so you can see it. You can see some of our trees we tap. We got 2 big maples that we tap, and they flowed well last year, so I'm assuming we'll have a good flow this year. Sometimes, depending on the year and how it's flowing or not flowing, we have to supplement a little bit with some of our local producers. Some of our small producers give us a 5-gallon bucket of sap or whatever, that sort of thing. So that's the sort of thing you'll see. In the house, you can tour the house. Of course, that'll be open. Silver Dollar pancakes. Now, folks, not a meal, but taste it. Buckwheat pancakes, Silver Dollar with real maple syrup. So you can go in there and taste a couple, 2 or 3 of them. And I really like the buckwheat taste. It's got a very unique, strong flavor that you don't normally get in most pancakes, other than probably my most favorite is probably potato, like yourself. Potato pancakes, we all know those from Mom, and Mom used to make, or Grandma made them, that sort of thing. But you go to the house and do that. They're also going to be working upstairs on the loom. They got some experienced people that have worked on the loom before. We've got a great big old loom upstairs there, and you can see that being demonstrated. And downstairs or wherever, they're going to make some church pew dolls and that sort of thing, something that the kids can take home with them. So it'll be very interactive. When you come to our site, we try to get you involved in whatever we're doing so that it can be interactive and you can learn by doing. In one of my things coming up here, I went to a thing that is called Anarchist Guide to Museum Programs. And in there they said kids don't want to watch history, they want to make history. Isn't that a revolutionary idea? The kids don't want to watch it, they want to make it, sort of thing. And so we'll discuss a little bit of that a little later, but that was just kind of a good interlude to talk about it. But in the cabin, Tom's going to be out there you're going to cook down some, what did you call it, dinner? But not for everybody.
No, that's for the help.
The help, right.
But we're going to do like maple toffee.
Okay.
You heat it up till it's almost ready to start to make maple sugar, and then you put it on shaved ice or snow. We're going to use shaved ice because the way it's melting.
Quality control.
Yeah, there we go. I want to eat some too.
Yeah,
let's just put it that way. And we'll have that there, and that's tricky stuff.
Yeah, you kind of experimented first time last year
Well,
with it.
a couple of years,
Yeah.
last 3 years, we've played with it, and we found that each time we improved, but not enough.
And it has to be really pretty hot, huh? At a certain point, it's kind
You
of
get
sets.
You get it. Well, let's see. I'm going to lie to you. I think it's you get it boiling to 219 degrees, and we don't have thermometers, so that's a guess. That's maple syrup. 240 and a few degrees. Mix that softball stage candy makers, which I don't thoroughly understand.
Sure.
But the thing with the granulization and all that, you get it to just before you go to sugar, then you pour it onto that shaved ice, and it then gets real sticky. And use a stick and you got yourself a lollipop.
Right.
And my thing I'm working on is to do it in a small enough container that I can get it really boiling well, and then pour it quickly, and you eat it. And then when the next group of people come, I can do the same with them.
That was the hard part in the past.
Trying to
is
hold it.
Consistency.
Yeah, and it makes sugar on its own.
Right.
Last year, about halfway through the day, we changed our demonstration to making maple sugar just because it was making itself, and so we just let it.
Yeah, yeah.
But this year, I'm really working on. I've got to find the right pan yet, and it's got to be the right pan for our era too. So
Well, and part of the problem for Tom's demonstration is we have a fireplace in there, and so we're trying to control that on a fireplace versus, say, a stove or something where you can control the temperature. He can control it only to a certain degree.
pull it off, put it on.
Yeah, and to keep it that consistency. So hopefully, if you get there, he'll have it. If worst case scenario, you'll have maple sugar to try.
Yeah,
so.
we'll have a treat of some sort in the cabin. We've just been given a collection of animal skulls.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're all cleaned and ready, like you'd see in museum or natural site. We're not quite sure how we want to mount them yet, so I'm going to have them there on a board. This is the first time we've had them out. One of the local trappers here, who's a fur buyer, gave us. I mean, they're wonderful.
And like how many animals do you have, Tom?
I think 6. We've got
6.
a bear, we've got a coyote, we've got beaver, muskrat, skunk, fisher.
You know, that'd be a nice presentation, Tom, for your school kids to, if they can line up an animal with the skull, can they figure
And
out?
they're all fascinated with the hides that we have
Yes.
in the cabin, which are
It-
part of the normal prop.
It kind of takes it one step further.
We're gonna. It's kind of like something we can do from time to time
Mm-hmm.
that keeps their interest.
Sure.
I don't want to do it every time we're open, have it out, because how do you change it then?
Right.
But I'm working on this. It'll be just temporary. It won't be the way we're probably going to display it when we're done. But it's right in the. Let's see what it looks like, and what people's ideas are, and then maybe we can develop a new part of our program, because the kids are fascinated by them.
Yeah.
Some of the reenactors have brought them to the summer festivals over the years, especially the beaver. When we're talking about beaver hide, they have the beaver skull there, and the kids are just fascinated by it. So
Yeah.
we'll
so-
see how it works.
And next we can go to the school, and the school will be open, of course, and the school marms and the master gardeners will be there, and they'll be, I'm sure, talking a little bit about what they'd like to plant next year at the site, and they've got a lot of new ideas and things they'd like to do. And they'll have a craft there, something for the kids to do, some project. I think they want to get the, what do they call it, a hectograph or whatever they got, the old time.
It's not the machine. It's just a paste thing.
They want to get that running, and then maybe have the picture for the kids to color it or something like that. I heard them talking about it, and so they'd like to do that. The barn will be open and interpreted. The bunkhouse, Larry Knutson, one of our members, will be in there, and he does an excellent job in the bunkhouse. That's our newest building on the site, so if you haven't been there, it's a good thing to stop by and visit with. And then the 3-bay shed will be doing some wood projects, and also you can see the Sawyer's Bay or the ice house, and you can see that, and they'll explain that to you. The project they were working on there, Tom, was what? Was a Whirly, the toy they're making? Whirly Zig or something like that?
In the house they were doing whizzers.
Whizzers?
Yeah.
The house, or was that
That's
out
a
in
button whizzer, yeah.
Button
Yeah.
whizzer. They're doing that in the house, but they'll be having some
they'll
sort
be
of a
making
hands-on
something. They always
project.
do.
Last event, I think at our Heritage Holiday, they did Jacob's Ladder, which was very, very popular. So we'll have lots of those events going on. I think the only building that we don't know for sure yet, I haven't heard from one of our backup blacksmiths if the blacksmith shop will be open, but if possible, it'll be open. But otherwise, all our other buildings will be open for interpretation and going around. It's on March 23rd. It's a Saturday, and it's from 10 to 4. So I hope you come out with family. It's $3 for adults and $1 for students. We actually had folks in this day and age, can you imagine a reduction on price? We went from $2 to students to $1. We want to encourage more and more children to come out because that's our future in history as we know it. As interpreters ourselves, we got to get that next generation out there and get them interested in. And so
that's why we do it.
Yeah.
We're all frustrated amateur teachers.
Yes.
I mean, we are really when you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have school groups in the spring, we'll have a bunch of them again now, starting I think late April or early May, through the month of May, into June probably a little. Well, not too much into June, but I love it when the kids come. I mean, that's the greatest. And
Yeah.
when kids come to our events, they're just in awe, you know.
Yeah, and it's like we always say, we get so much feedback from the kids because a lot of times, you know, when you're interpreting the cabin or I'm in the house or school or wherever I'm at interpretation with the school kids, you wonder, are these little second graders or first graders, are they getting anything? You know, are they absorbing anything we're showing them or telling them or having them feel, in your case, like hides and stuff like that? But when they come back in the summer at a different occasion, they're pulling Grandma and Grandpa by the arm and they're going over showing them exactly what they did and how they did it. So they know all that stuff, and I think it's osmosis or something. I don't know what it is.
They observe so much more than we think.
Mm-hmm.
Even as parents, we should have been a lot more
hands-on,
careful or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, they perceive stuff that we think is going because they're not reacting; they're just watching. But that noodle is working all the time.
Yes. So if you get a chance, come on out. We'll maybe give you a little mention of this towards the end. But Tom and I and Don Matthews and Marianne Mischow went to the MOMMC conference. It was in Piqua, Ohio. Piqua is a native name. Of course, a lot of our names are, you know, like Nakusa is a derivation of a native name, and it meant that when these individuals were cremated or something, the ash that left from the cremation in the wind or something was them going out into the world or something like that, and that's what Piqua means in one of those dialects in the Miami tribe sort of thing. So we're going to go through a few of the conferences we went to. First off, we each did a workshop. All of us but Marianne, we each did a different workshop. I did one on the canals, and then we basically visited different canals in different areas, and it was very interesting. It was the Miami-Erie Canal, and that went eventually, it took 4 or 5 years though, from Lake Erie to the Ohio River. And it was basically, the main reason was to get agricultural goods out of the hinterland where they could be traded to the East Coast or to New Orleans or someplace like that. Just to give you an example, they were getting wheat, they were selling it in New Orleans for like 50 cents a pound or something from central Ohio, where they shipped down the Ohio River and of course down the Mississippi to New Orleans. But that same wheat, when they had that canal done, they could get it through the Miami-Erie Canal, through the Erie Canal itself, and could get it to market like in New York. They could get $4 or $5 a pound for that wheat. You know, it's such a difference in price if they could get it to market. So the reason why they made these canals and they dug these canals, and most of it was all handwork. It was Irish and Germans and Asians and everybody working on these canals, and they got about 30 cents a day for digging these canals, but you know, the going wage probably wasn't great either. But it was very interesting. You know, Ohio is kind of like this, folks. It's got like the top of it's in the middle of the state, so they had to kind of go down to the Erie Canal and go down to the Ohio River. And we were towards the Ohio a little closer, but we drove over to where the peak is. And some of those areas, since they couldn't get water in there to float the canal boats were about 40, 50 feet long, carried somewhere in the neighborhood of like 40, 50 tons of materials. And
really?
And how they could get that is they had to dig down some of those. So there's one place, they call it the break, and they had to dig down, can you imagine, by hand, 52 feet in blue clay to get it at level so that this canal would flow, because they couldn't get water. There's no water higher up that they could flood this canal with, so they had to dig down 52 feet, and I think it was something like 4 or 5 miles they had to dig this, and you can imagine what kind of labor this was. I imagine they had diggers down there with pick and axe and shovels, and then they probably put it in these big containers, and they pulled them up with oxen or horses or something like that. The canals were all horse or mule drawn. The canal boats were set up in 3 sections. There was the captain's cabin on the front, where the captain and his family stayed, because some of these people were on these for months. I think they could run them about 9 months a year. About 3 months the canals were frozen enough that they couldn't move traffic on the canals. So the captain's quarters, and then they had freight, and then they had a quarters, a stable for the mules or the horses, because they had to carry their own mules and horses around and pulled those. They weren't self-propelled, or they had not enough water flow that they had to be pulled with a tow path by the side of the canal. And on the back end was the cruise quarters, and also some freight in between. So now some of the canal boats were all covered because they were for carrying passengers. The only problem with the canals, as we know and we've read and seen in the past, is about time they got them done, and this was in the mid-1800s. They started them in about 1825, and they got done about 1840 on most of these canals. What the problem is the railroads were coming in at the same time. So all that work they did lasted for about 15 years, and then they were obsolete. Mm-hmm. The railroads took over. Now, some of the sections in Ohio, the canals are kept up fairly good, and some are kind of grown over, but we kind of follow the canal all along different spots. And some places, like in cities called like Lockport or something, they had, they could show where the locks were there, and they dropped, maybe 25, 30 feet through a series of locks and everything. So they play up the history, but it was very interesting. The site we were at has a canal boat, but of course with the ice and everything, we weren't getting a ride in. Otherwise, they could have gave you a ride for half a mile or so. But it was a great learning experience. I knew a little bit about canals because I've been on the Erie Canal at Lockport, New York, and I've done a few other things, but this was a little more in depth. And so the guy was like a fountain of knowledge, like his kids tell him. He said, "Mom, somebody can tell you something and it takes 10 words, and he takes 10,000 words." But he's a former school teacher, so I can see where it comes from very naturally, sort of thing. So
my kids say the same thing about me.
Yeah. So it was very, very interesting. And Tom, what did you do for your pre-conference workshop?
I did a bread baking class in the impetus for me to take it is that we're going to bake in an outdoor wood-fired bake oven.
Oh, and something you had never done before.
No, and we're in the long-range plan discussing something like that at the Wakely site. What it'll look like and when it'll get done, if it ever gets done, will be coming. But we got to know about it first.
Sure.
And this one was a brick oven. Looked like a smokehouse, for most intention purposes.
Are they inside of a building, Tom, or are they?
They were a separate building. This one was a small brick building, maybe 8 foot by 4 foot. Okay. And then the oven was in the middle of this. It had a wooden door, or an iron door. You fire it. The idea with this one is different than what I've observed before. This one has a chimney, so you can really get it going. And if you are having trouble holding the heat, like when it's cold, you can leave some of it in the back and bake on pans rather than right on the deck. The cob ovens that I have observed before, you get those really, really hot, that mud and clay and whatever, really, really hot, and then you take all the ash out and you wipe out the inside with a mop, and then you slide your bread right on the stone in there, and that's how you bake with it. This one was slightly different. And in talking with the interpreter that was there, who's a professional that really does this stuff, he said too, this one is quite old. It's an original to this house.
Okay.
So we're talking 1870s
I think it started
and 80s,
Yeah, that house was, your house was, what was it, the Patterson, or what was it? House.
Johnson House.
John,
No, not the Johnson House. Arnold House.
Arnold House.
They were German Anabaptist
Okay.
church affiliated, and it was kind of an enclave of several families.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very, very interesting. We also got to cook on an 1880s wood range inside, which is different than the one we have. It's the one that comes after the one that's at the Wakely site. We're about 1860 with that stove that we have there. And but that was very interesting, the difference in the heating and
They've made a lot of advancements.
oh
evidently.
yes, oh yeah, and the drafts and all the things. We know how our site is kind of, or our stove can be kind of fickle at times. Well, this one can too.
Yes.
That part they didn't improve on.
Yes.
But several different kinds of yeast, some of the homemade kind of yeast stuff where they actually used a yeast starter, but then you could hold that, not sourdough, but this liquid yeast.
Mm-hmm.
You could hold it for several weeks and then make a new batch with some of what's left on the other one.
Okay. So you save
then-
a little as a starter.
Yes. And then we made pretzels.
Ah.
Oh, they're just terrible.
Yeah.
They're just terrible. But we had a lot of really, really good bread. Some of it with hops as a flavoring in the yeast.
Did you notice much difference in the crust between the outside oven versus the inside metal?
The outside
cast
oven
iron?
was a little crustier.
Okay.
I think it was hotter quicker
Mm-hmm.
than the one in the house. But we had that evening, they always have a meeting and a tour of some other historic sites, and they had a little bit of lunch there.
Mm-hmm.
You notice I didn't eat a whole lot.
Right.
Because I had enough bread in the afternoon. We had to sample all of it.
Yeah.
And you know, in my way of thinking, that crust at the end of this loaf of bread, we made small loaves or round one, little, lobes like so.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of crust on those.
Yeah.
My goodness, they're good.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was really
Did
good.
you bring any back, Tom?
Yes, I did, and we made croutons out of them.
Oh, I bet you it was
And
great.
little spread cheese on top.
Yeah.
Oh, jeepers, they're just terrible.
Yeah. Sounds like a good pre-conference. one.
Yeah, oh, it was.
We're going to go through a little bit of the talks we went to at the MOMSI conference, the Outdoor History Conference. They break it up into, they have usually 3 concurrent sessions at a time, so you can go to whichever one that might interest you. And most times we split up. Sometimes we ended up with 2 of us at the same conference or anything. The first one I went to was on the Shakers of Villette, Ohio, and there was a professor that talked on it. And basically the Shakers, we've heard about them because mostly through the furniture and different things like that, very simple, very plain stuff. The Shakers came from England originally, and they were a break-off of the Quakers. Evidently the Quakers weren't conservative enough or too conservative or whatever, so they broke off from them. Of course, we know that Shakers were a communal society, but say once you entered it, say a husband and wife and children, the women, the girls, and the or children, if they're smaller, would live in one hall, and the men would be in another. There was no mixing once they entered, sort of thing, entered the Shaker community. So to regenerate the Shaker community, it's only by getting people new members, because it's not supposed to happen, but I imagine it did happen. It's a real traditional name. The full name is United Society of Believers in Christ's Second Appearance. So that's the formal name of it. Like we'd we'd have the what am I thinking of? Salt Lake City.
Latter-day Saints.
Latter-day Saints, and we got shortened variations. It was founded in Manchester, England in 1747. Mother Ann Lee was the founder in England. Before 1860, there were 19 villages and 6,000 members at the height of the movement, and then it kind of dissipated. There's actually 2 living members left. There's an older lady, and I didn't know there's anybody living yet from the Shakers. There's an older lady, and there's a man that's probably 50-ish, that are still alive that are two original, not the original Shakers, but still two Shaker members, and they're at Sabbath Lake, Maine, and so that was kind of interesting. Tom, one of your talks you went to?
I went to one, the Historic Preservation Officer of the Miami Nation, Miami tribe. It's a little unusual because it's the Miami tribe of Oklahoma, but that's where they were taken to when they were moved.
They must have put a lot of tribes in Oklahoma. That Cherokee went there too, didn't they?
That was the Indian nations in those.
Okay.
That was supposed to be
All Indian land.
all Indian land. Well, that's another whole story.
Yeah.
But some of the Miami people owned land in Ohio, so they could stay. And so there is a community of, I think Doug said 600 in the greater Fort Wayne area. And that's about where they
And
were.
that's where he was from.
Yeah, and he's the assistant historic preservation officer for the whole tribe.
Wow.
But he's up there, and then there's another guy in Oklahoma. And then they do conferences and cultural immersion things even out west, because when they were building some of the big dams and other projects out in Washington and Oregon, many of the tribal members went out there and then stayed there. So there are groups of Miami all over. In fact, I learned one that during the Beaver Wars, and that's very early on in the fur trade, when the Iroquois were first moving into Ohio, the Miami left and went up to near Green Bay, where the Ho-Chunk and Menominee are now, or were then, and Sauk and Fox. And they were up there for 100 years.
Wow.
And then came back after they signed a treaty between the Miami and the Iroquois Confederacy to kind of get along. The Ottawa people were part of the Anishinaabe group of peoples, brokered this treaty. And I had no idea that ever happened. So
Wow.
It's really interesting that these folks, how they moved around, and that they now are being able to trace this stuff. He said it's like if you have a bunch of threads and you drop some, and then you're able to go back through research and pick up a thread that's part of your culture. That's how he did it as to describe it to us.
Yeah.
And that one was very interesting. And then I did one on meat preservation. A fellow that we know well did that. He's a hog butcher from way back. A museum professional who does these things that the hands-on, honest-to-goodness living history. And we didn't do any hog slaughtering, although I have done that with him.
Yes.
And the man he's really good, and he's a great teacher. But he did a class, hour and 15 minutes, on preservation of meat and things. And it's something that I had learned from him before, but I was very glad I went because you get refreshed as to how this works.
Yeah, it sounded good. I went to that, I had mentioned earlier about the Anarchist Guide to Museum Programs. And what this is there's two gals that were in charge, and they were just talking how they get more people involved. And it's usually, if you get kids involved, you get the adults involved. So they went all the way through Lincoln Logs, having kids working with Lincoln Logs, Laura Ingalls Wilder celebration, authors, where if the kids wore a costume and the author was there, they could get in free. Making dolls, making butter, celebrating J.K. Rowling. I mean, they're bringing this up almost to the present day. They feel that you got to get the millennials involved, and for some reason in their education they didn't have a certain aspect of this, so it's hard to get them involved. And so they got a event they do. It's called Ignite the Light. They do candle dipping, and then they show whale oil lamps, hurricane lamps, reflection lamps. They go through the whole spectrum of lighting as it would have been. And do Anne of Green Gables, a Dr. Seuss, spelling bees, nature walks, egg races. They make butter and then they serve it on saltine crackers so the kids can taste it. And they sometimes put together things where packaging, like when was this? Because a lot of people don't realize that a lot of these foods we eat, Jell-O, some of these things are 100 years, 125 years old. They've been around forever. So they try to put that, and then they have one that I've tried to get at the site, and I just haven't had success with it. But Tom and I were talking on the way back, and we'd like to do sometime in the future a sheep to shawl, where you shear the sheep and the shawl is spun and woven, and then you knit it, and then you got the shawl done at the end of the day. You know, wouldn't that be a great thing? I've tried it, just hasn't fallen into place. Either the sheep shearer wasn't available, or the shawl makers weren't available, or whatever. So that would be a kind of one that would be interesting to get involved in. I think that we've got more to talk about, but I think we'll save that for another day. We're running a little low on time here. We also want to remind you that our Sugar Bush, Wakely Sugar Bush, it's on March 23rd. That's a Saturday from 10 to 4 at the site. You can participate in different craft things in the house or the school, or help with the cooking down of the maple sap, collecting of the sap, putting it in. You'll see both the native way to do it and the pioneer way, like the Wakeleys did it. And you can participate in that. The charge is $3 for adults, $1 for students. We're off County Trunk Z, just off Highway 73. Just follow the signs and you can get there. And we look forward to the next time. Thanks, Tom, for being on today.
It was a good day.
And we'll see you next month. Thank you.